Today's reading is from Matthew 7, verses 13 to 23. Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many may enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only few find it. Watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. By their fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus, by their fruit you will recognize them. Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform many miracles?' Then I will tell them plainly, 'I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers.' This is the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ."
This is a guy named Spencer Seabrook, and in 2015, this is near Squamish, BC, as it said, he sets a slacklining world record, and you're going to see right away, this distance, this height, you see what he's doing. He's not supposed to do that. That's what he's supposed to do. Yeah. Unbelievable. Yeah, world record. Well done. The suspense was killing me. Now, obviously, he makes it across the narrow road that leads to life, and he doesn't fall to his death and die. A feat like that, world record, obviously it takes incredible courage, it takes incredible skill, it takes an incredible willingness to spend the last moments of your life in profound regret. And yet he does it. He makes it across. I mean, there's the great exhilaration and great joy on the other side. Now, in the passage we just heard Grace read, Jesus uses these metaphors, these images, to give us two very, very powerful and very contrasting images of destinations that await us on the other side of one road or the other. There's the narrow road that he says it leads to life, life everlasting, life abundant. It's more wonder-filled, more joy-filled, more glorious than anything our senses can really experience or know. It's more than anything our imagination can come up with. The Apostle Paul and Isaiah, they say, "What no eye has seen, nor ear has heard, what no human mind has conceived," all the things God has prepared for him. You can't even imagine how good it is to get to the other side, to the life side. Hollywood hasn't come up with anything that rivals it. No author, no creator, no artist or painter. There's nothing that can quite capture how good and amazing it is. And then there's the other road. The broad road that leads to this destination of destruction that is so severe. Again, words fail to capture it completely. The best that we could do here is Jesus says it's like a tree that you chop down, you chop it up, and you toss it in the fire. This fire that burns and burns and burns And it's a metaphor of some kind, because anything else just falls short of how severe his warning is. And so how do you take one road or the other that carries you to one destination or the other? And you can hear this, and you can end up thinking that if I walk the right road, if I choose the right road, then I will get the right destination. And that's just almost it. It's almost there, but not quite. It's not quite the whole thing. Because hearing it that way, it can be quite intimidating. It depends on you. It's like you have to be the one that gets on that slack line. You are responsible for making your way across this great height, this great distance, perfectly, or else tossed into the fire that is never quenched. One little misstep, one miscalculation, and that's it. Because if you hear it that way, then we've actually misheard it entirely. We've missed everything Jesus is saying, because he doesn't want you to take the right destination. He wants you to get the right destination. He wants you to take the right road to get there. But getting on the road isn't always what we think it is. And so this whole section, Jesus is kind of wrapping up the whole Sermon on the Mount, this way he's calling us to live. He's giving us this message to carry into the world, the salt and light that changes everything, everywhere, for everyone, forever. And he's bringing it to a close. Next week we'll wrap this whole thing up. And he says, this is basically the picture of your life. There are two roads with two gates. There are two destinations. There's two crowds, the many and the few. There's two trees, the good and the bad. There's the two foundations that we'll look at next week. Then there's a crowd also gathered that day listening to Jesus preach this. They're in the crowd. There's the fishermen, there's the farmers, there's the tradespeople, there's the business people they're traders, maybe in food or clothing or textiles, materials. There's mothers, there's children, there's grandmothers, students, everybody, all walks of life. They're all there listening to this preach on the side of the mountain as Jesus lays out this vision for his kingdom. And as he wraps this up, they will leave the hillside. Everyone will go back to their lives, but Jesus is saying as they do, everyone will take one road or the other. Your life, nothing may appear to change, and yet you're traveling towards one destination or the other. There's still fishermen, there's still tradespeople, there's still winemakers and mothers and fathers. Even as their destination it may be changing forever. And so the same is true for us. The message comes, and it leaves you with options. There's only two. There's the way of the many, and there's the way of the few. Your life will go down one or the other. There's not a whole bunch of options. But Jesus wants you to know the choice is yours, because eventually you hit the end of the road. There's no more road left. There's no more time left. There's no more choices left. And so you make the choice for later, now, here. You choose the right road now. There's a way of death that leads to life, and there's a way of life that actually leads to death. Which do you choose? And so how do you know what road you're on? How do you choose correctly? How do you make sure you're headed down the right path to the right destination? So we're just going to go over a few of the road signs that show up so that we get to differentiate, so that we can choose wisely, make the most of the options in front of us. And so Jesus says, different groups on each road. There's the broad road. It's filled with the many, with the narrow road has the few, the broad road has many. And he's implying that is easy. It's smooth sailing. There's no friction. There's no resistance. You can just go with the flow. And I'm actually going to show you a couple pictures here. Laura, if you have those pictures, go to the first one that I'm not in. This is a picture of the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem. And you can see kind of the original gate that let you, the doorway that would be into the church. It's the great big opening that is there that has since been blocked in to a smaller arched opening and then to a smaller narrow opening again. Of course, now this happened hundreds of years after Jesus was dead and resurrected. But it shows you, at one point they had a massive gate and anybody could get in. And the problem was that anybody did get in. raiders came in on horseback with swords and chopped people down. And so to defend themselves, they had to keep shrinking the gate, shrinking the gate, shrinking the gate. So only the few could make. Go to the next picture. You can see how big the doorway actually is to get in. Not everybody will make it through. And so there's a sign on the broad road first, and it just says this. The broad road sign says, self-interest first. And Jesus says, you'll see the trees and you'll recognize them by their fruit. Notice the signs. One kind of tree, it bears good fruit, grapes and figs. And the other bears bad fruit, no fruit at all, thorns and thistles. Now, both trees, they get the same sun, they get the same rain, they get the same nutrients from the same soil. And yet they do completely different things. So on that day, at harvest time, what they produce it's entirely different. The fruit tree, it produces something, fruit, that gives life to others. It feeds the world. The fruit tree doesn't eat the fruit itself. And the other just has these thorns and thistles. They hurt, they harm. That tree, it deprives life from other trees to feed itself. It's stealing from others around it. And a tree like that, it's only good for one thing. Chop it down, chop it up, into the fire. And now going through these, you hear the descriptions, you hear the signs, you want to recognize them, and it can be easy to miss fully what Jesus is saying. It can be easy to think, well, there's just two groups of people. There's the good people. They're the morally upright. They're good neighbors. They work hard. They pay their taxes on time. They're kind to babies and puppies. And then there's bad people, and they do bad things. And you hope that they get caught and they go to jail, or else they're the greedy old misers like Mr. Burns and the Simpsons, and they rub their hands together with glee whenever anything bad happens. They get wealthy off the suffering of the poor, and they don't like children and babies, and they kick puppies, and they do all kinds of awful things. And they're the people. Chop them up, throw them in the fire, be done with them. It should be obvious. But what Jesus has been saying through the whole sermon is it's not. It's not obvious at all. He's way more nuanced about this. He's way more clever than you expect anyone to be. See, here's what Jesus knows, especially about the flora, the fauna, the trees and the bushes from then that we might miss. Back then, at certain times of the year, you'd have some vines that would produce berries. And at first, you can't tell those apart from what will become the grapes on the other vines. They look the same. But they're not. And eventually that vine will only produce thorns. And there are other trees, and at first they begin to flower and bud, and they look like the fig tree. They look the same, and you think you're going to get figs on that tree. But it's just thistles. It will wither. No fruit. They deceive you. And this is what Jesus has been pulling together all the way through this message. There are people who appear morally upright. They do good things. They pray at church. They give to the poor. They fast on the right days. And yet they are still the bad trees, because their ultimate goal is to take life from others to feed themselves, to feed their egos. Jesus calls them the hypocrites, like the religious leaders, the Pharisees. And so even today, you can have people, they show up, they pray, they tithe, they give. Thorns and thistles. They might even perform great miracles with great power and heal the sick and great prophecies, and still fruitless, he says. That essentially, the verse right before this, it was do unto others as you've heard others, as you would have others do unto you. It's what we talked about last week, the golden rule. These are the people that do not live by the golden rule. They live by the broad road rule, which is this: do for you at the expense of others. Jesus says they're all around you. Don't be like the people that they use anger as a tool for revenge. They want their way, not God's will. They judge others to make themselves feel better, to look good. Do not judge. There are others, they use lust and greed to consume from others, to objectify people and use them to feed an appetite. That others are good for the next orgasm or the next belly full or the next dollar made. That's all it is. And so but there are people that they can appear good at the right time, but their goodness is just a way to make themselves look good, not do good or be good. They might pray at the right time with the right words. They might give to the right causes, but it's not to honor God. It's not to seek his kingdom first and his righteousness. It's to seek their glory, their status, their esteem. It all goes towards the same outcome for them. Enlarge their ego, enlarge their empire, not for the glory of God. The morally corrupt people, obviously, we recognize them. They're all around us. They're online. They're in schools. They're in politics. They're at work. You see these people. But there are others in our churches, in our neighborhoods. They are around. And you miss them. And if you do, you can be devoured by them. Jesus says, look for the signs. You'll know them by their fruit. See, the thing is, if you arrived at someone's house and they had a sign like this one on the gate, you would know to manage yourself accordingly. You would watch out, you'd stay away, you would be careful and cautious. But that sign isn't there. That's not the one that you need to look for. You need to look past the obvious, not just in others, but in yourself. Because here, the wolves, Jesus says, they're disguised as sheep. The bad trees look like the good trees, at least at first. So the sign would be more like this one. Beware the wolf that looks like a sheep. Here's what I think is going on in kind of the broader Christian subculture in Christianity these days. There is a steady stream, one after the other, of these wolf-like leaders in disguise that are being exposed. I'm used to being immersed in some of these news pieces and stories, and it's happening all around us everywhere right now. There's a lot of careful investigation of where things have gone wrong. One of the obvious ones is Ravi Zacharias. And I hate even mentioning anyone's name to single anyone out this way. But that's someone that I've quoted positively in the past. It's someone I've learned from. It's someone that has appeared to bear good fruit, that did so much good. He built this great apologetics ministry, the defense of the Christian faith. And it seemed to be bearing fruit all over the world. But at the same time, as he's building this large platform behind the scenes, he was manipulating and abusing dozens of women in all kinds of awful ways. Leveraging his status on the platform, in the light, under the spotlight, to do awful things in the shadows, in the dark. And now all of the fruit is tainted with this poisonous taste to it. And there's lots of other ones. If you read the news this past week, there was ABC News in Australia covering certain stories. There's the largest denomination in the United States this week dealing with really significant issues. Stories of thorns and thistles, of wolves in disguise that have caused terrible, terrible damage. And of course, it's always to the most vulnerable people. It's always to these women, to these young kids, children. And it's deceptive because at first, the wolves, they look like sheep. They're these warm, likable, caring, charismatic people. You want to follow them. You want to trust them. And then as the brand grows, as the platform gets bigger and the crowds begin to come, more and more it's about protecting the brand, the mission, the appearance of things. But it's always done at the expense of the most vulnerable. And if it gets exposed, here's the thing. What do they appeal to? They want to say, but look at all of the good things we've done. Look at the fruit. Look at all the books we've sold and the songs we wrote and these great talks we've given. Look at it all. But if you look past the appearances, when the lights are off and the puffs of smoke clear, there can be this great rot at the center. And all you can do is chop it down, chop it up, and throw it in the fire. For some, there's a conversation coming like the one he predicted. He said, it'll be like this: Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform many, many miracles? Maybe. And still Jesus will say, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. All the great works, evil. When you're on the wrong road, you can do the most incredible things. Great power, even claim it in Jesus' name. But if it is done to serve your interests rather than the kingdom's, if it's done by taking life from others, to consume them, to feed your own appetites, that even the most amazing works of power is just kindling for the fire. Toss it in, let it burn. See, the road to destruction, it just has that sign that marks it. Self-interest first. By the signs, you'll recognize them. So, quick detour here, though. This isn't implying that if you ever act in self-interest, you're on the broad road to destruction, there's no way out of that for you. He's not saying that at all. Sometimes, especially in the book of Proverbs, the Bible does picture our lives this way, where we're on one path or the other, and on our path we can take these wrong turns. We can be walking in the light, and then we turn into darkness with the sin, and then we need to repent. We need to turn back, and it's the metaphor for life. And at times, all of us lose our way. All of us need to turn back. All of us. And that's why Jesus, in the prayer he teaches us in the Sermon on the Mount, he says, just remember to pray like this: Lord, forgive us for our wrong turns. Forgive us our sins. We all do it. We just know we're going to do it at times. So this isn't about wrong turns, stumbling. The old word was backsliding. It's not that. Listen to what Jesus says. He says, I never knew you. We were never in relationship. There is not a moment where I called you friend. There is never a point where they were on the right road. It was just an illusion. It was deception. And yet still, they can be in our churches. They can be in our neighborhoods. They can be in our workplaces. They can be in our homes. They might be in the row sitting next to you. Not in this church. But for people walking the narrow road, he's saying, watch out. Be discerning. Be careful about who you look to for life. Because if you're not careful, you meet these wolves and they feed on sheep. They will not shepherd them and protect them. They take from you to serve themselves. They might do it with your sexuality. They might do it with your wealth. They might do it with your influence to try and enlarge their platform and their status. And this is what happens. It happens all the time when we prioritize giftedness, when we prioritize impact over compassion and character. Because giftedness alone, whatever sphere it's in, not just church and ministry, obviously, giftedness alone does not produce fruit. It can give you the illusion of fruit, but then it becomes thorns and thistles. People get hurt. Real fruit grows when giftedness is submitted in humility to God and his purposes, his kingdom. Because if it's not there, when the praise comes in, the lights go on, and the microphones are turned on, it is easy to begin serving other interests, to feed off of the few. And high impact with low character, it just makes everything exponentially worse. It's the worst kind of damage. And so I believe, like I said, there is a reckoning going on these days. We are in it. And God's hand is in this, bringing things out of darkness into light. He's exposing it. And my prayer really is just, God, have mercy on us all. It's not just true of ministry leaders. It's true with business leaders. It's true with leaders at schools. It's happening in homes. Everywhere you go, wolves in disguise feeding on sheep. And when we give them our time and our energy and our resources, we produce thorns and thistles unwittingly, unwillingly. It just happens. And it disillusions us in awful ways. I've seen it and I've been a part of it. And the thing is, the tragedy, it just compounds in the worst ways because it causes us to pull back and we withhold and we stop giving and we stay at arm's length. And of course, that's what the enemy wants. Because if you stop contributing, if you stop bearing fruit, that's the fruit that others need to feed to find life. And then it doesn't happen. It holds back the next generation of life, the next season. And Jesus is calling every single person, all of us, from the many, he's calling everyone, all the crowds, each person, come, find life, come, take the narrow road. There's an incredible, amazing, unimaginably good experience on the other side of this, beyond what your senses can even understand. It's so good, no words can capture it. They all just fall short. It's your highest, your ultimate good. But you only get there by taking the narrow road between this point and that one. And frankly, Jesus, I've said this before, he's not a particularly good salesman. The image he creates here, it is not inviting. The same way that broad and wide implies easy, smooth sailing, go with the flow. Narrow implies constriction, restriction, compression, resistance, bearing down on you, pushing against you. The broad road, it's like one of those commercials you see on TV, for American TV, for those prescriptions they want you to call your doctor and get. It shows all these people having the time of their lives. They leave the house and there's butterflies and birds singing and flowers blooming and everything looks amazing. And the song is playing and you want that life. And at the very end, you get the list of side effects that goes, side effects may include vomiting, diarrhea, blindness, heart attack, stroke, diabetes, headache, upset stomach, insomnia, light sensitivity, dry mouth, night terrors, and fire, unquenchable fire. There's the broad road. And the invitation Jesus gives us, it's like it's the other way around. First, you might endure all kinds of awful pain, the pressure coming down hard on you, the resistance holding you back, suffering, sacrifice. But on the other end, it's pretty flowers and birds singing and dancing around the streets. The allure of the broad road is have now, pay later. The sign would say, indulge your appetites. And the narrow road, it wants you to deny your appetites, that you make sacrifices now to give to something greater beyond you, something bigger than yourself, not self-interest. And he says, do it with your money. The temptation is to store up earthly treasure, feed that appetite. He's saying, don't do it. Store up heavenly treasure. And when people travel the broad road, they want to do it in style. You want to look good. But if you travel the narrow road, literally and figuratively, you have to deny that appetite. In a literal way, I know families in this church that every month sacrifice a new car payment worth of money to give here, to give to Bridges of Hope. And instead, they drive an old car, and it just runs on prayers and faith. Because the nicest, newest vehicle can't yet get you to the right destination if you're on the wrong road. And so Jesus calls us to this with our sexuality. In chapter 5, he says something along the lines of, if you live with this unbridled lust, it's living a life of adultery. You're prostituting yourself to everything around you. Not just with our sex, but with money and greed of all kinds. And so a couple months ago, from that passage, I talked about the broad road kind of sexuality that in our culture, the value is that is passed around outside of here is that anything goes as long as there's consent. You consent, and the other person can also offer their consent. So that what it means is this: broad road sexuality is just do what you want with who you want, when you want, as long as they want to too. That's it. It's okay. On the narrow road, I do not believe it matters at all if you are gay or straight or one of the other options, the other categories that are available. Because every single person has sexual appetites and impulses that we're called to deny, all of us. Instead of feeding them, the temptation is to feed them in ways that take life, instead of ways that build life and intimacy and connection. So Jesus says, if you're doing that, stop. Cut off your hand if you need to. Sex itself is this good, God-given gift. It's a wonder, but it is to be stewarded with caution and care. And so here's what I think, not sexual preferences. Here's what I think really matters. And it is this, and it matters in your sexuality. It matters in every single area of life. Have you fully submitted it to the Lordship of Jesus Christ? Are you willing to lay it aside to walk the narrow road? Because not everything, you can't drag everything with you through that little gate. It's like in the Lord's Prayer. He said, is God's will being done on earth, in your body, in your money, as it is in heaven? On the broad road, if you have an appetite, you feed the appetite. That's the way of life. Good life is satisfied appetites. But on the narrow road, you know this. You feed an appetite, and it just grows. It enlarges. It's never satisfied. And so if you devour things to feed your appetites, eventually your appetites, they devour you. This is what addiction is. At first, the will can manage the appetite. The will can control it. But eventually the appetite grows, and it gets flipped around, and the appetite controls the will. It devours you. You try to feed life, but it ends in death. And so life on the narrow road, it just goes in the other direction. You experience a kind of death now, a denial. You deny appetites and impulses that you would like to feed so that you can give life, bear fruit for others. And it ends in more life for you and more life for them. And living this way, it gives us that FOMO, fear of missing out. I'm afraid if I deny myself, I will miss out on this one and only opportunity. I'm going to miss out on all of these great things. We are afraid we won't live as well now or later. We'll miss out. But the thing is, as Pastor Daniel says, remember, no one gets out of life alive. So what are you living for? What are you devoting yourself to? A good tree bears fruit, and it will feed the world. And strangely, when we deny ourselves to live that way, we learn that a life poured out is also the most fulfilling life. The broad way is concerned with accumulating means to live well, and yet offers nothing meaningful to live for. How do I gain life? Surrender it. How do I lose life? I cling to it. The broad road will call you to be great, do great, go first, win every time. And greatness on the narrow road is by going last and serving first. It's upside down and it's backwards. How do I get rich? I give it away. How do I get even? I forgive. The people, as I said, the crowd gathered around, they're listening to Jesus speak. They will all have to leave the mountainside and all go back home, go back to the way of life, go back to the business, go back to school, go back to their friends. And for those that take the narrow road, many of them, they will end up rejected by their families, by their communities. And the generations that come after Jesus, they will be criticized, persecuted, and many of them killed for their faith. Blessed are those who are persecuted. Theirs is the kingdom. It will happen. And likely today in our part of the world, especially around here, we're safe. We're isolated and insulated from that kind of threat, that pressure bearing down on us. It's not going to happen. You might get little tastes of it. I did just yesterday. Yesterday morning, I was walking out of the church, and as I was leaving the building, a young guy in a passing vehicle, the window down, hanging out the window, he yells at me, coming out of the church, "Praise the Lord!" Now, I was giving him the benefit of the doubt at first. I thought, maybe he just sees the hair and the beard, and maybe he actually thought that I was Jesus coming out of the church, and he was just legitimately wanting to praise me. But for just a moment, I felt the sting of mockery, of being isolated from the many with the few. Just a sliver of a moment. I knew what it was like. And in the first generations of Christians that followed Jesus down the narrow road, constriction, persecution, even death. We'll likely never know anything like that. But here's what we can do. Here's a picture here. This is of Rick and Sheila from the church. They lead Blessing the Children in Ethiopia. They're with 3 pastors there. Pastor Aman, Pastor Kajila, and Pastor Mustafa. And these men, they were once Muslim. They came from Muslim villages, Muslim family communities. And one by one, each of them, they experienced Jesus. They experienced the offer of life on the narrow road and the life it offers at the end. And one by one, they've turned their lives over to Christ. And not only have they converted, baptized, they've become evangelists. They're part of a group of 40 or so Muslim pastors, ex-Muslims, that now go back to their communities, back to their families, to bring the hope of the gospel, hoping that everybody will turn off the broad road onto the narrow road. And I've been able to meet some of these men. Here's a picture from a service, new converts. There have been hundreds and hundreds of converts. There have been reports of healing and miracles among them. Here they are, some of them getting new Bibles. The next picture is from a baptism service. They have left their communities, and they need money for baptism services to travel somewhere else because they can't do it in their home communities. And so they go, they get baptized, and they know that by returning, once they go back home again, they are opening themselves up to all kinds of persecution. They know they can just convert quietly, keep it inside, and be safe. And yet they choose to leave the safety of the broad road and commit themselves fully in their baptism to say it's worth everything. And they will experience the worst kind of persecution and alienation. It will happen. You won't experience it. You won't have to make that kind of sacrifice. You won't have to suffer in that way. But you can sustain them in theirs by making some sacrifices now. Right before COVID hit, we fundraised for some pastors in Burkina Faso, and Daniel was on his way over there. Pastors facing similar threats there, that Muslims coming down from the north, threatening their life, their churches. People died. And so you showed up. You made a gift. You made an offering. You sacrificed. You denied yourself an appetite to feed them there, to bear fruit that lasts into eternity. When you give to causes like that, it makes a difference forever. But you have to deny yourself now. When you give to your church, when you make an offering here, you deny yourself now. You deny yourself some pleasure or appetite. And yet, it creates life. Life, it feeds life everlasting. But it will cost you. Appetites, you have to deny them. But you know that any appetite you have, it just needs filling again and again. It's always hungry. Better to deny it now and feed life for eternity. That is what makes life most meaningful. Suffering and sacrifice, they don't keep you from a full life. They help fulfill your life's purpose. They don't get you on the road, though. Suffering and sacrifice, no matter how big it is, no matter how costly it is for you, it does not put you on the road and guarantee you the destination at the end. That's what the gate does. Jesus, he's mixed things around here, and it's easy to miss it. See, normally, when you're going somewhere, you travel down the road, and when you get to your destination, there's a gate that has to be opened to let you in. And Jesus, he flips it around. Read what he does. Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate, and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. The gate comes first. He makes the invitation to everybody, all of them, the whole crowd, come through the narrow gate, but only a few will. The thing is, you go through the gate first. You go through the gate now to walk the road that leads to life. And see, this is all the difference. Jesus is asking you to choose. Choose now. Choose. Make the decision for which gate you enter through. Because whether you take the right gate or not determines whether you walk the right path, which goes to the right destination. But the thing is, it happens through his suffering and his sacrifice, not yours. We enter through the gate by putting our faith fully in him. Trusting him fully to open the gate on our behalf. In the Gospel of John, Jesus says he is the gate. He is the good shepherd that leads them through the gate. He says he is the road. He is the way that leads to life. And he is the life. He himself is our destination. And you can choose it now. Not at the end of the road when your time is up. You choose the gate and enter now. Eternity begins now. It's not your sacrifice that opens it for you. It's not your great fruit that you bear that lets you through the gate. Because if that was the case, if that was what needed to happen, it would be like walking that slack line. You only get across by your skill. It's your effort. And one misstep, one miscalculation, a little bit of wind, and that's it for you into the fire. When you go through the gate and walk the narrow road, your sacrifice, your suffering, what you give, your giftedness, fully submitted, bears fruit that feeds people forever. It changes everything, everywhere, for everyone, forever. And it only happens because he first opened the gate for you. See, walking the narrow road, it does not depend on you. It's you depending fully on him. See, he took the thorns and thistles of our mistakes and wore them as a crown of death so that you could wear the crown of life for all eternity. Instead of walking the slack line, it's more like this. I've got a picture here from the 1800s of a daredevil named Blondin. Blondin, Blondin, he's French, and he had this incredible high wire act. And here he is going across Niagara Falls, 1,100 feet across, 160 feet up in the air, and certain death waiting for him below. And so he was famous for walking across this wire back and forth. Incredible act. And one time, as he's doing this, the Duke of Newcastle from London is there watching him perform this incredible feat. And so Blondin, he walks across, everyone's amazed. And then he goes across with a wheelbarrow. There's a picture of him with the wheelbarrow here. Everyone is amazed, in awe. And then he puts a sack of potatoes into the wheelbarrow, and he pushes that across, and everyone is in awe. And he says to the crowd, from the crowd, who believes I could carry a man across in this wheelbarrow? And he turns to the Duke and he says, do you believe I could do this? And the Duke says, of course I do. And Blondin asks him, well, then would you like to climb in? And he says, of course I would not. And so he stands in front of the crowd, the many, and he says, is there anyone that will climb into the wheelbarrow and let me push them across? And finally, one person stepped forward, climbed in the wheelbarrow. It was a small, older lady. And she hopped in, and he pushed her across all the way. That woman was his mother. She was the only one who knew him, who trusted him, who was willing to put her life in his hands. And this is what Jesus is calling each and every one of us to do. You can't take much with you in that wheelbarrow. You have to unburden yourself fully. Yeah, but it is an act of faith, an act of trust that says there's nothing else I can count on. There's nothing else I trust that will give me life, life everlasting, this life that is beyond imagination. And it can come with real risk, but on the other side of real risk is real life, wonder, hope, purpose, peace, forgiveness, healing, wholeness. Even amidst the suffering and sacrifice, there will be trouble, Jesus promises you. And there will be life. So Daniel's gonna serve us communion. First, we're just gonna sing part of this song. And just as we do, I'm gonna pray. I'm gonna invite everybody just to have a moment to consider what holds you back, what weighs you down, what keeps you from traveling freely, what keeps you from trusting Him. Whatever it is that is preventing maybe fruit. So Heavenly Father, once again, we're just reminded that all of our chips are in with you. All of our hope is in you. The only option we have left really is you. And that with great grace, great kindness, and great compassion, even the worst of sinners, the worst wolves, can pass through the narrow gate. So God, wherever it is, whatever weighs us down, whether it's been in our sexuality, all of the things, Jesus, that you've been leading us into to confront, and our treasure, our emotional life, the anger and the worry and the anxiety, because we just can't trust you to make things right. Heavenly Father, this is the moment where by your Spirit we need your grace once again to meet us, to touch us, unburden us, to travel light and free with great trust.